Welcome to the latest Evershed Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.
Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, kicking off Season 4 of our Global Energy Transition series. Throughout this series of webinars, we explore key energy trends to bring you the latest analysis and insight. My name is Simon Davis. I'm a commercial and regulatory partner based in London, and I'll be the moderator for today's session, which focuses on PPA trends in a changing energy landscape. So some commentators have observed that we're currently in the golden age of PPAs, and the interest we've seen in this session is certainly testament to that. We've got a brief session today, but some fantastic guest speakers. Firstly, I'll hand over to my colleague based in the US, Alyssa Walker, who will briefly run through some PPA key trends that we're seeing. Following Alyssa's short presentation, we'll jump into a panel discussion with our guest speakers, and our guests will introduce themselves shortly, but they'll be able to provide us with insights from both the seller and the buyer sides of the PPA transactions across multiple markets in which they work. In terms of housekeeping, today's session is being recorded. It will be shared with you by way of follow-up email, as well as being available on our website. If you have any questions throughout the session, there is a Q&A function, but we're running a short session today, so we may not be able to answer questions live. However, we're more than happy to follow up with you after the session to ensure all your queries are answered. So without further ado, I'll hand over to my colleague, Alyssa.
Hi, everyone. As Simon mentioned, we'll be covering recent trends in the PPA market. The first trend we wanted to highlight is power price volatility. Recently, we have experienced a general trend across many jurisdictions, in particular in Europe and the UK, of power prices dropping significantly from very high levels that we experienced from the energy price crisis and supply chain crisis in the Ukraine war. This has meant that the corporate PPA market is not quite as much of a seller's market as it was in 2023 in Europe. In the first half of 2024, power prices have stabilized or even increased slightly in such markets, but it's still more of a buyer's market in those affected jurisdictions. And we continue to see renegotiated or restructured power PPAs deals in light of updated power curves and long-term price expectations. In contrast, in the US, after years of declining or flat power demand, new data centers are driving strong increases in electricity demand. This is driving demand for new gas-fired generation in addition to new renewables, as utilities seek any way to meet the growing demand. Another trend we wanted to highlight is changes in law and efforts to future-proof long-term PPAs. PPA parties, in our experience, have an increased focus on long-term outlooks and ensuring that their contracts stand up to an extremely dynamic energy market over the long term. While a number of commentators are expecting PPA terms to become shorter, we have not yet experienced this on a wide scale, especially for new build projects which require long-term revenue certainty. One of the main areas of focus for a long-term outlook of PPAs in the negotiation process is change in law risk. In particular, how to allocate it between the parties. For example, future environmental attributes imposed under new regulations. Parties are grappling with how to allocate ownership, cost, and pricing associated with those future environmental attributes. In the UK, parties are contemplating how to address long-term radical reforms of energy markets that are being consulted on, which could include a switch to locational pricing. In the US, top of mind for parties is attempting to allocate risks related to anti-dumping and anti-circumvention regulations and government sanction policies that could result in delays and change economics for the project. For instance, new tariffs have been imposed in the US on solar panels, and a new petition that could result in additional duties on solar panels is now pending. This is causing concern in the US markets that threatens to delay PPAs and projects. In addition to change in law risk, potential physical changes to the plant are also a key long-term consideration. For instance, implementation of co-located battery energy storage or changes to optimization that might result in future ancillary grid services. There is a tension here in an evolving market between developers who want to maximize future optimization opportunities and buyers who want to protect their commercial bargain. Another item we wanted to highlight is supply chain issues and delays. new energy projects globally are experiencing continued supply chain disruption, owing to the impacts of the pandemic and subsequent inflation and high demand for certain products, for example, transformers. We have consequently seen a number of situations where pre-signature negotiations or fully executed PPAs have had to be reopened to renegotiate the price or the deadlines. We've also experienced an increase in requests for aggressive delayed damage structures, higher caps on sellers' liability, more conditions in the PPAs, price reopener clauses, and schedule relief events specifically targeted at supply chain issues. Buyers are also more interested in due diligence in the project supply chain outside of the contract to ensure they're investing in a viable, deliverable project. Last but not least, we wanted to briefly mention general developments in the PPA interest in emerging markets. The PPA market has been incredibly resilient to recent market changes and trends, with record deal volumes being conducted in the last 18 months. In addition to the typical strongly active PPA markets such as Spain, Italy, the Nordics, UK, the US, we are seeing a lot of increased interest in Germany, Greece, India, and Singapore. Utilities are still active in the offtake market, and sometimes acting as intermediaries between developers and corporates on a resale basis. Demand from corporates is still strong, and there is a continued market for route-to-market PPAs for merchant projects or projects that have government incentives. In terms of the type of PPA, we're still seeing virtual PPAs being used a lot for corporates that have demand in connected markets, though some have a preference for physical or sleeve PPAs, so those aren't going away. However, we've also seen a big increase in private wire PPAs, and in some cases, corporates taking an interest in acquiring equity in such projects, whether or not on the customer's site. We expect more corporates to become invested directly in projects in the future, whether behind the meter or off-site. So that covers the trends that we wanted to highlight today, and that concludes the recent trends segment. Thanks all.
Thanks very much, Alyssa. Great summary and bang on time, so couldn't ask for more. Obviously, we covered a lot of bases there. So like we said, the session will be recorded. So if people want to revisit those or ask us more about those, then we can do that after the session. So the next segment is the panel discussion, and we're really delighted today to be joined by three guests. So we have Ali Charlton from Schneider Electric, James Phillips from Brookfield Renewables, and my US-based colleague and global co-head of energy, Tom Warren. If I could just hand over to you guys first, just to sort of give more of an introduction to yourselves, and then I'll come back for the first question. So maybe you first, Ali, if you could introduce yourself, please.
Yeah, hi everyone. Thanks, Simon. Great to have the opportunity to be here. I co-lead Schneider Electric's European PPA advisory team. So effectively about 45 people based in Europe helping corporate clients to source renewable energy with a primary focus on really helping them to identify, evaluate and negotiate PPAs with renewable energy project developers. As a company and as a business unit, we're active globally. We've got big teams in the US and additional people across the globe, but my role is very focused on Europe. And likewise, more broadly, we do all sorts of aspects of renewable energy sourcing, but I'm really focused on that PPA side.
Great, thanks. And James?
Thanks, Aaron. Hi all. So James Phillips, I work for Brookfield out of our London office in our global key account management team. We act as really a central point of contact for our global customers, helping them meet their decarbonisation needs by kind of sewing together the offerings from the ever-expanding universe of Brookfield portfolio companies.
And Tom, please.
Yeah, thanks, Simon. Yes, I'm Tom Warren. I sit in Atlanta, Georgia in the US. As Simon mentioned, I co-lead our global energy team. My practice focuses on renewable energy project development, project finance, and M&A. In particular, I represent all types of clients, including developers, investors, utilities, off-takers, both corporate and utility, in PPAs of all types, including physical and financial hedges, PPAs, and energy storage agreements. Thanks.
Thanks, Tom, and thanks all. So this is the point I get to relax and have the easy job of just asking you guys some questions. So the first one, just sort of tying back to Alyssa's summary there and the trends that were highlighted. You heard our observations on the market there, and obviously a lot of these things are sort of jurisdictional specific and don't trend globally in the same way across all the markets. But which of the trends resonates with you the most in the sort of markets that you operate in and within your business? Maybe Ali first, please.
Yeah, I mean, firstly, I would say all of the above. I think those are all things that we're very much seeing in the market today. If I could pick out a few that I would say resonated the most from what we've heard there, I think the point about market price volatility is obviously enormous. A PPA, on the face of it, people think is providing a corporate buyer with a degree of price hedging and therefore certainty. And so in theory, you'd think that volatility might increase the interest in the PPAs. But for maybe a few reasons we might get into in more detail later, based on the matching of the supply and the demand, the price structure, the PPA deal structure, and other considerations, that hedge value might not actually be that great if there at all. And so in that case, that volatility just increases the overall uncertainty. It's harder for buyers to get and then maintain approval throughout that negotiation process. It increases the risk that the developer will come in and change the price partway through the process. And then tied to the volatility question, I think in particular, two topics are price cannibalization, so that increasing risk of with increased renewable penetration, low or even negative prices at times when the solar or wind project is producing the most, is a big issue, and how that's managed both from a kind of decision making and a contracting perspective is important. And the geo price volatility. So historically, PPAs have also provided a good hedge against long-term increases in geo prices, which were kind of going through the roof. And conversely, that decrease recently that we've seen in geo prices has created some challenges. Not much to add. Obviously, delays is a huge topic as well. So whether that's for supply chain reasons or regulatory reasons, both of which we just heard about, it's a big issue, and how that risk is managed. You know, what's force majeure, what's change in law, what damages are in place, are all increasingly important. And we've seen some very concrete examples of how well-negotiated PPAs have actually protected clients in the event of those kinds of issues arising between PPA execution and the actual commercial operation date. So.
Yeah, thank you. And that geo point, the volatility around the geo pricing is often forgotten about in these conversations, and actually, yeah, is really important, particularly when you're looking from the buyer through the buyer lens. And yeah, I think it's the volatility rather than the high or low prices, which is the challenge, right? But hopefully, we're entering into a era of more stabilization. But I've heard lots of different comments on that on different jurisdictions. So over to you, James, in terms of which of those trends we talked about sort of resonated with you the most.
Yeah, definitely. And I think I'll stay a bit higher level here and say scale. So I think from our perspective, renewables development, renewables offtake through PPAs, it's no longer niche. It's the mainstream. On the development asset owner side, we're seeing a number of players now building very significant global businesses and portfolios, and not just the legacy utility players. For example, I think at Brookfield, we've now got over 30 gigawatts of renewable assets operating globally, and just shy of around 200 gigawatts in our pipeline. On the corporate PPA demand side, the forecasts in power consumption are rising massively, being driven in large part by kind of data center demand growth for cloud services and AI. And they're frankly staggering and increasing all the time. So I think what we see is that there is a huge amount of volume that needs to be transacted here. And actually, it's only going to increase. So I think on both sides of the table, on both the buy and the sell side, we've only got so many resources. So we have to do these deals. So with this massive scale comes a need. And I think what we'll probably see is a requirement for transactability and efficiency in doing deals as well.
Yeah, thank you. And I know that point around the data center demand will chime with you, Tom, because we were discussing that in preparation for this. So maybe I hand over to you to talk on those trends as well.
Yes, exactly. I'll pick up on that. Yeah, the data center load, the demand growth is staggering. After in the U.S. in particular, we had a long period of pretty much stagnant electricity demand, and that's just completely changed with the explosion of data center growth, and that's led to just a lot of creativity. For one, whereas some of the big technology companies are, of course, very much on the forefront of renewable development. We've seen some of the data centers are really just scrambling to get their power supplied, and so in the near term, we're seeing more trend away from the data centers insisting on renewable energy for the near term because they just need power. But I think that's going to trend back into the need to cover that renewable energy as this develops. And then people are being creative as well. We're seeing more data centers and some other industrial facilities sited on site behind the meter with some large renewable projects as a way to try to mitigate transmission risk and cost. So people are being very creative there. So in the longer term, we're going to have to see how that plays out. But that's a key trend that's really pushing the market and driving the market right now.
Thank you, Tom. So on to our second question, and you can give me a one-word answer or you can elaborate. It's up to you. But with a sort of focus on the corporate PPA market, I guess, do you consider it currently to be a seller's market or a buyer's market? So I think if we went back, 12, 18 months, well, in European and UK, at least, it would be sort of quite widely considered to be a seller's market. But I think that is shifting slightly in some people's view over the last 6 months or so. So yeah, maybe you first, James, in terms of how you perceive that corporate PPA market at the moment.
Yeah, totally. So I think because we have a kind of a global view here at Brookfield, I'll answer maybe on a bit of a wider level. We always have these discussions around a particular market is a buyer's or a seller's market at a point in time. I think what we're liking to do now is say, look, global power demand is growing significantly, while grids are becoming increasingly constrained everywhere. And with this comes a backdrop of energy markets that are developing and evolving in real time. So when it comes to transacting PPAs, of course, some markets will be more straightforward to transact in for maybe one party at a point in time. But for me, we have to look at this on a wider level. And I really do believe that the most successful players are going to be those that take a more holistic view of this, form strategic partnerships and collaborate to kind of meet each other's goals over a longer term, rather than just attempting to solve their puzzle kind of one problem at a time, in one market at a time.
Thank you. Yeah, and I think that's sort of the problems with that short-termism we've definitely witnessed, and tying back to that sort of power price volatility point. If you're striking a deal on the basis of a specific market and a specific price at a specific time, it doesn't always work out that well for a transaction. It takes a few months to complete. So, Ali, any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I think when I was thinking, I did a spot poll of my colleagues as well. I think about 12 people responded and they agreed with me. I think we've really gone from when I first moved to Europe from the US in this sector 3 years ago, wholly buyer's market, and then it really flipped to kind of a wholly seller's market. Yeah. And I think we agree we're in a more balanced situation now. We do still have a huge number of potential buyers, including the data centers we've heard about, the electrification, the sustainability 2025 targets, all of these drivers. But the economics are getting more challenging, and there are some kind of constraints coming in around on the demand side. And then on the supply side, we are seeing more projects coming online that maybe some of the supply chain challenges have eased, even if in certain markets the regulatory ones are still there. And we're certainly seeing new markets projects coming in a whole bunch of countries that we hadn't really looked at before. So overall, I think we're all feeling it's quite balanced at the moment, and I totally agree. It's a challenge that we all need to work together on. And what I love about this sector is that the project developers and the buyers, it's a real win-win solution if you can come to a good agreement, and it's something that both sides really agree needs to happen and are really committed to working on. So
Yeah, I'll just quickly echo what both James and Ali said, which is it's just very nuanced right now. The market, there's a lot of dynamics in the market. There's pressures on both sides. For instance, again, the demand on the one hand, on the other side, some of the supply chain have eased. Solar panel prices in the U.S. have dropped a good bit recently. On the other hand, there's some recent tariff action and additional petitions in the U.S. that have created more uncertainty again on future supply. So there's just a lot of different dynamics going on in the market right now. And while we're waiting for Simon, I mean, I'll just ask Ali and James our next question. So I'm just gonna go ahead, and Simon, join us again when you can. So what markets and what technologies do you see as expanding and keeping you the most busy over the next year or two?
So I think we're definitely seeing a lot more geographical diversity. Historically, we've seen a big focus on projects in Spain and the Nordics for those virtual structures, and with a kind of smattering of UK, Germany, France, Italy. But now we're seeing a whole range of other things coming into the pipeline. We've got a bunch of things that are hopefully going to be announceable not too far away in several countries in Eastern Europe, for example. And we really expect that diversification to continue globally. It's definitely happening as well. We're seeing a lot of activity in Asia Pacific, in Latin America, Brazil, and beyond. Then on the technology side, I think we've seen a gradual transition from wind to solar, obviously, but I think it's worth noting the offshore deals that are starting to come through. I think historically that was a harder market for corporates to participate in, but that is starting to change. We had interestingly a big deal in the Netherlands that we advised Albert Heijn on recently, for a big offshore PPA. And another thing that's maybe interesting is the repowering coming through. So some projects which need a total repower, and actually it's effectively using that same land for an interconnection for a new project. And so that's starting to come into the mix as well.
Thank you. And James?
Yeah, thanks, Simon. So I think for me, it's storage. I'm sat in London today, and I actually think the UK is probably a really good example. We're at the stage now where a significant number of solar sites coming through the planning process have got co-located batteries. And obviously this makes complete sense. Solar is proving to be an absolute front runner around the world when you look at power generation on a levelized cost of electricity basis. However, a standalone solar project is unlikely to deliver the dispatchability and reliability that a corporate customer needs. So in comes storage. I think in terms of how that storage will actually be used in practice for corporate customers, will be somewhat driven by corporate customer needs. Maybe the system is used for firming solar output to a pico block, right? Maybe there is a corporate 24/7 hourly matching strategy in place. Maybe there's a co-located battery, but it's used totally independently to operate in the ancillary markets to secure revenues. There are kind of this plethora of potential viable solutions which can work for corporate customers while still enabling economic viability for a project. So we're spending a lot of time internally at Brookfield kind of thinking about this and speaking with our key customers at the moment. And I think the next stage will be the fun bit of them working out how we can take these concepts and structure them into functional contractual frameworks that work for us all.
Yeah, thanks, James, and thanks, Tom, for covering for me during the IT issues. I just sort of two observations from myself. I definitely see much more uptake in the corporate market in the off-taking directly from offshore wind farms, and people aggregating demand to access those big projects. I think that's a definite sort of recent trend. And obviously the storage space, and that's where most of the innovation is being driven in terms of the types of products that are coming out, whether it be co-located or standalone, optimization, tolling agreements, and so on. So just on that point, and probably got to sort of be conscious of time here, but we've got a couple of minutes left. How do you expect PPA products to evolve over time in your jurisdictions of interest? Do you see more sort of switch from virtual to physical, shorter tenors, more commoditization? I think you touched on that earlier, James. How do you see the sort of evolution in the near term on the products? Maybe I'll put that to you first, Ali, with a sort of focus on, I guess, how buyers approach this market and what type of contract they're looking for.
Yeah, I think your point about physical versus virtual is a good one. We typically see a lot of buyers initially thinking that they want a physically delivered direct local PPA, but then in many cases actually shifting to a virtual structure, primarily driven by scale and the ability to do, one or two very large deals instead of multiple deals in other places, which then helps with both the process cost, the process efficiency, the economies of scale, and then kind of price optimization across markets. So go for the most economically attractive location. You can have a simple local physical PPA for a small volume, but you give up a lot in order to do that. Given time, I will not go into details. I think another thing that's really, we're seeing a big change now is, you mentioned aggregation. I think that was sort of historically the holy grail. How do you actually make that work and make it feasible? And we've gone from a couple of sort of small aggregated deals to now some really big supply chain programs across either industry groups like our energized pharma industry, and then or single company, such as one we're working with PepsiCo, and things like that. And there's a lot of others are bringing together maybe 10 companies in a single buying cohort, and that's becoming viable and feasible. I think because of increasing standardization, commoditization, nice idea, but I think we're a long way from that for the time being. But a little bit of standardization is happening, and we'd like to see more for sure to simplify.
Yeah, I think a little bit is good, but not too much for the advisors. So, James, over to you.
Yeah, no worries. So, look, we always have this discussion around the evolution of PPAs on a more fundamental basis, right? I think a great example is, are we going to see these kind of shorter term tenors, for example, for new build projects? And I think we can get a bit caught up in it and remember that renewables are very different to thermal assets in that they require significant amounts of upfront capital that must then be recouped on an appropriate risk-adjusted return over the lifetime of an asset. And this is where the PPA comes in. And I think I'd therefore be personally surprised if we see a material shift from a debt or equity perspective where parties suddenly get comfortable with kind of totally different risk profiles, that taking shorter term tenors and having significantly more merchant risk. So what I would say though is that the single asset, single deal, pay as produced PPA has served the market very, very well. But we're now seeing our kind of global corporate customers requiring a more complete blended decarbonization solution that brings them value on both an ESG and an economic sense. So I think what we'll see is a movement towards these kind of more decarbonization frameworks that incorporate renewable PPAs as just one part of them.
Interesting, thank you. And we've got 1 minute left, or 30 seconds left. So I'm going to try and put everyone on the spot and say if there's one thing that you can sort of describe in 1 or 2 sentences in terms of, but for anybody listening who's sort of delving into this market, what could people do to make these transactions easier to conclude? James first.
Yeah, no, engage early.
Engage early. Okay.
Yeah, discussions are often very reactive from both sides of the table. Go out, speak, find potential partners, and kind of work together on delivering something that works for both of you over the longer term.
Ali?
I would say work on the targets. If you've got, as a buyer, if you've got internal buy-in at a very high level for clear, publicly stated commitments around renewable energy, around decarbonization, around whatever it is, then doing something like a PPA, which is never going to be an easy journey and is going to require high-level approvals, is going to be much smoother and have a much higher chance of success if you've got that commitment that everyone is working towards. And then obviously get a good advisor and get a good lawyer.
Tom, I think you'd probably echo that last comment, right?
I totally echo both Ali and James's comments. Definitely getting your advisors in early to help you structure the deal before you're far along is paramount, and engage Eversheds Sutherland in particular.
Okay. Well, I think that's a nice note to end on. So thank you all on the panel for your insights. Thank you to Alyssa for your great summary earlier, and thank you to everybody who attended today. Please follow Evershed's Sutherland Energy on LinkedIn if you don't already, for future updates, including events. And as mentioned at the start, the event has been recorded and will be sent to you as soon as possible. Thank you all for joining. Goodbye.
Thanks all.
Thank you for listening to the Evershed Sutherland Legal Insights podcast.